Good day, mates. My name is Mordecai, and welcome back to the show, where a relatively inexperienced roleplayer narrates various RPG-related stories as a learning tool. At the table, there are times when a particular character gets to pull off an impressive feat or display of skill, and sometimes this gets accompanied by celebratory events, such as fanfare and the feeling of accomplishment. In a way, the character has a spotlight shown upon them, and they get a lot of gratification for the hard trials undertaken to get to that point. But what about when a player wants the spotlight to shine on them all of the time, and further, that they want to be the only one under the spotlight? At the table, for a tabletop role-playing game with other players? This is what results in the Spotlight Hog, a category of player that desires the spotlight at the expense of every other player. And Spotlight Hogs can include powerful, all-knowing Dungeon Master player characters to being the topical edgelord who savors the kill on all of the low health point bad guys. So naturally, this has the potential to get considerably worse. Before we get started with the narration, if you like my content and want to see more of it, be sure to subscribe and like the video. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Enjoy! Let's delve into the often terrifying world of r/RPG horror stories. Today's story is titled How a Terrible DM Burned a Game to the Ground, and is written by Dominion Loser 123. This happened a few years back, so for the 10 other people involved, if you happen to see this, forgive me for getting some of the details wrong. And Lexi, if you somehow find this, congratulations on finding my Reddit account. You may redeem your free loaf of banana bread at any time. Before I get into the events, I should probably discuss the structure of this campaign. We had 12 players, 4 of whom would DM smaller scenarios with a single over-DM, Lexi, not her actual name. Most players had 2 or more characters, and would swap to whoever they felt like playing on that particular day for a given mission. Lexi, likewise, also had 2 player characters. I will get into them later. Most quests started with a bounty going up, and had pretty rigidly controlled rewards available. Except for Lexi, of course. She could award way more gold, experience, or items without getting berated, and she did so for her characters on multiple occasions. There were also extensive homebrew rules tacked onto 5th edition, adding a second hit point bar, a few dozen spells interacting with said hit point bar, and as many monsters that focused on just attacking that bar specifically. All of this was constantly being rebalanced and changed, so there were a lot of poorly balanced encounters, and Lexi's content tended to be the worst. At one point, I flat out told her that a particular mission she had crafted would be absolutely miserable as written. She said it was fine. I ran it as best as I could, without overhauling it completely, and the players, they hated it. And I hated myself for giving them such a bad time. And I never used any of Lexi's material after that. Lexi's characters were something of a sore spot for most of the group. Now, characters started at level 3, and the rate of experience drip was extremely slow. At 5th level, characters were able to get a unique feature that gave some minor but thematically relevant bonus. One sorcerer who was completely dedicated to only using fire spells gained the ability to ignore immunities to fire, as an example. Lexi's characters, on the other hand, one of them got the ability to wield non-finesse weapons using dexterity, and a lot of homebrewed content specifically meant to make them nigh unstoppable against the homebrew monsters, which was the only thing they ever fought. The other character got a 9th level wizard ghost attached to them, who would help out anytime they had the slightest bit of difficulty. Lexi also vehemently opposed any other characters getting major benefits from unique features such as this, because, in her words, it would be game-breaking! As the months dragged on, most of the players stopped wanting to have anything to do with Lexi, which was more than possible since the majority of players lived in the Americas, whilst Lexi herself was European and went to bed at a relatively consistent time. Plus, nobody really had fun when Lexi's monsters might just randomly one-tap your character, because Lexi never considered that low-level characters had to rely on their armor to not get instantly nuked. Or yelled at for up to 30 minutes at a time, because Lexi never thought that the Necromancer villain might use their minions to buy time to escape, instead of waiting in the graveyard like good little massive multiplayer online boss. Still, just about everyone else in the group got along, and we had a lot of fun telling funny stories, like how one character adopted some orphaned children, and was later saved by the ghost of their mother, or how one charismatic character would so often lead the charge against the marshalling forces of darkness. That last character, in particular, became important during the tipping point of the campaign. We were setting up to run a small dungeon crawl, with just a couple encounters that ended with a few Githyanki as enemies, just giving a new character a chance to get the spotlight with two relative veterans, that is to say, level 5 characters, acting as support. One of the players was stepping up to try DMing for the first time as well. Lexi herself went to bed right around the start of the mission, so she wasn't there to snipe at us. And then the fight with the Githyanki had started. 2 whole rounds later, and it was a total party wipe. The DM just went silent for a bit, unsure how to handle things. One of the characters was starting to become the linchpin of several story arcs, so having them die here, it would turn things into a complete disaster. I piped up, saying that Githyanki are slavers, so they might take the party alive. I'm unsure if this is true. I haven't checked the Lords of Madness book in years. The DM seized on that idea though, and narrated the end of the encounter. Things kicked into overdrive from there. All of the DMs frantically jumped into the private chat and began furiously planning, tripling the size of the dungeon, creating several new encounters, looping in players and telling them what was going on. And within an hour or two, we had a multi-party dungeon crawl, with nearly every character in the campaign participating in some capacity as the player characters mounted a desperate rescue mission. One person was DMing for one group whilst playing in another. One of the captives even managed to escape midway through the dungeon and joined the fight to free the others. The next 5 hours were a blast, and the manic drive infected everyone, pushing them all to put everything into what felt like saving the campaign. And by the end of it, we were exhausted, but satisfied, and started trying to figure out the rewards. And that's exactly when Lexi woke up. Now, consider this scenario from her perspective. You go to sleep thinking everything is normal. You wake up finding out that your players have turned a disaster into a magnificent show. One that they'll remember for years, as the time they all came together in a glorious mixture of Avengers and Ocean's 11. Except the average character level was 4. Do you A. congratulate your team for putting it all together on coffee fumes and camaraderie? B. shrug and move on, because you have better things to do? Or C. immediately whine about how you weren't included and devise a similar scale event that somehow only involved your characters to show how they're even cooler than the rest of the mega party? If you chose C, then congratulations on your narcissistic personality disorder diagnosis, because that's exactly what Lexi did. She didn't care that we'd pulled off a miracle, or that everyone was over the moon. The only thing that mattered was that her characters weren't a part of the event, that her story wasn't the one taking center stage in everyone's minds. The campaign sort of fell apart after that particular incident. The rest of the Dungeon Masters started copying over some of the homebrew material that we actually liked, along with chat logs of the scenes we thought were particularly poignant, and within a few weeks, Lexi just deleted all of her material and disappeared from the Discord server, after locking all of the old logs so that no one else could see them. We suspected it was coming based on the screenshots of chat logs involving her. Just about everyone had started sharing what she had said along with everyone else, as a way to vent at being called things like infinite autism, or similarly derogatory phrases. We made a half-hearted attempt at reviving the campaign with the same players, but unfortunately no one really wanted to take the lead, so it never really got off of the ground. Still, it was better than anything Lexi had ever ran, because after all, no D&D is still better than bad D&D. And that's the end of the story. There's a few things to talk about with the story and the events that transpired. Firstly, I find the concept behind the server to be really fascinating. Having a large group of players, each of which having a DM to run a highly collaborative campaign, with a sort of central DM whom acts as a central authority figure. I believe that in the Dungeons & Dragons meta that this is called an epic, but feel free to correct me. So, I really like the concept, at least at face value. However, we then have several of the Dungeon Masters also having access to player characters to participate in other parties that are being run simultaneously. It's possible that that isn't a bad idea by itself. After all, I have heard the expression that the DM is also a player at the table, but I always thought that statement was meant figuratively. Being a simultaneous player and Dungeon Master strongly runs the risk of creating a dreaded, all-powerful, all-knowing Dungeon Master player character, at least from my perspective. So, when we then combine that aforementioned risk with a central Dungeon Master who wants to be the spotlight hog, and then we have Lexi, the central DM with powerful characters that demand the spotlight at all times. And when we have untested and presumably unbalanced homebrew in abundance stapled onto the campaign carelessly, we have a boiling point for the campaign. And as a new player, the lessons that could be learnt from this story are that too much untested homebrew can result in disaster, and that the wider party is more important than the character that is being played at as the table. Oh, and no, this is far from the worst homebrew I've read on the subreddit. Not by a long shot. But that's for another time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe and leave a like. It's free to do, and you can change your mind later. If you have any thoughts on this story or feedback on how it can improve, feel free to leave a comment. Again, thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you all next time.